So the next thing we want to look at today is what's called a frequency polygon. So we want to create the graph of a frequency polygon. A frequency polygon, what it's basically going to be, it's going to be a line graph that's going to connect the midpoints. It's going to use the same horizontal and vertical scales. So that doesn't change from what we did from a frequency histogram. So it's very similar to that. So the first thing we have to do though is we got to determine the midpoint for the first class boundary. And then we're going to add the class width to complete the midpoints. Also, when creating this frequency histogram, when creating the frequency polygon, I should say, the graph needs to begin and end on the horizontal scale. To achieve this, add one extra boundary midpoint to each end. So to find the first midpoint, we have 64.5 and 74.5. Remember, to find a midpoint, we add those two values together and divide by 2. When we do that, we should end up with the 69.5. So from there, all I have to do is add that class width. Remember, we did that a while back. That was that 10. So we add 10 to each one of these. So I'm going to have this 79.5, 89.5, 99.5, 109.5, and 119.5. Those should be the midpoints of those values. It should be halfway between there. So 64.5 and 74.5. 69.5 seems to be in the middle. 74.5 and 84.5. 79.5 seems to be in the middle. So that's going to be our horizontal scale. The frequency is still going to be the same frequency from the previous datas. So from the frequency distribution, or even now we have it in our frequency polygon, we have this 4, 7, 4, 5, 3, and 1. So I'm going to bring that on down through here. So I'm going to have this 4, 7, 4, 5, 3, 1. So if I double check myself there, 4, 7, 4, 5, 3, 1. Yep, that looks good. So now that I have my information, I can now start creating the actual, what they call a frequency polygon, or sometimes I call it a line graph. Now notice one thing we have to do though is we have to kind of move the 69.5 out a little bit, because we're going to put another boundary in that's 1 to the left. So if I lose 10 there, I'm going to end up with this 59.5. So I have the 69.5, I now have the 79.5, I have the 89.5. I'm placing those midpoints here. 99.5, 109.5, and we have 119.5. So those were our midpoints. But remember, we got to go one extra midpoint over, so I need a 129.5 as well. So I'm going to just sketch that out there. So I'm going to have this 129.5 as well, and that should be where it ends up back on the x-axis. I'm sorry, we call the horizontal scale here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plot my frequencies now. So at 59.5, there wasn't any, so the frequency is 0. At 69.5, that's going to be where we had that 4. 79.5 is where we had that 7. So if I look over here, 4, 7, 89.5, we had that 4. And then at 99.5, we had the 5. So it goes back up to 5. At 109.5, it was 3. At 119.5, it was 1. And then we were back to 0. So if I can kind of create this here, I'm going to just kind of use some technology and pause a moment here and connect that. So see if I can connect that for us and pause the video. So by connecting these midpoints, I end up with this line graph. So we kind of see this thing traveling through here like this. So notice that these lines have these steepnesses. So, sometimes they'll be asking if which one has the greatest increase or So if the line from left to right is going up, this would be considered an increase. This would be like an increase. And also from this data point to this midpoint, that's a decrease. And notice how it's going in an upward direction. That's considered an increase. And then also how over here, we're all decreasing, decrease, decrease, decrease. So sometimes they ask you where is the greatest increase in the data. So you're kind of looking for where it's the steepest line. So it looks like between 59.5 and 16.5, it looks like the steepest. If I was talking about the greatest decline, this looks like the steepest line in decrease. So between like 79.5 and 80.5 would be like the greatest decrease. So some things like that you may be observing in the data. So that concludes a little bit of information on the frequency polygon. Another thing to point out, though, I haven't been doing this, but it's always good to have a title to kind of understand what this data is representing. So remember, this is pulse rates for students in a class. So I haven't been putting that title on there, but you'll be seeing those titles. Pay attention to those as we move forward.